So let's get started. It's so nice to see everyone this morning on this Saturday spring morning. My name is Joni Parsons, and I'm co-creator of Rebel 11. So Rebel 11 is all about women being connected, being a little edgy, and being timely and, spontaneous, like what you know right here. So my memories really stem back to my mom, as I mentioned a little bit last week when we were talking about houseplants. She was a single mom and she worked very hard, but she gardened with glee, and that brought her so much joy. She did all of the gardening and my grandmother did all of the cooking. So it was a delightful combination to grow up with. And I just want to say, because this is pertinent to what I'm going to tell you in a moment, my mom could grow just about anything in anything. Coffee cans, tree stumps, you get the idea, like anything and everywhere. So it kind of made me laugh this morning that I'm kind of doing the same thing, because her love of gardening, in fact, inspired me so much that on a recent Rebel 11, actually it was last year, a woman from Toronto, gardener from Toronto, was talking about urban gardening, and it spurred an idea. Ask my neighbor if I could use some of their property for container plantings. So what I'm going to do this weekend is I have 3 raised beds going onto their property. So here I am, like my mom, anywhere and everywhere possible that I can plant something. So I wanted to share that this morning. So I'm so excited to introduce my friend Willi Galloway. She was introduced to her to gardening by her family, which she'll tell you more about in a few minutes. Willi is the former West Coast editor of Organic Gardening magazine, which is when I met you, Willi. Yeah. A mom, an entrepreneur in Portland, Oregon, with the beautiful furniture store Perch. She's also an author, an avid gardener. Her book, Grow, Cook, Eat, is why we're here today and is a fabulous resource for all kitchen gardeners. Welcome, Willi. It's so great to finally have you on Rebel 11.
Oh, yay. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to talk about kitchen gardening.
So tell me a little bit about your mom. It sounds like inspired you as well.
Yeah, my mom, so I'm from Cheyenne, Wyoming. So I grew up in a place that is not an easy place to have a vegetable garden. It's got a short season, it's high altitude. But my mom grew up gardening with her grandparents, and they had a huge empty lot next to their house. And so she grew up gardening there. And when I was a kid, basically half of our backyard was a vegetable garden. And some of my first memories are like wandering through the pea rows, picking peas off and talking to my mom. And I remember one time she was digging in the garden and I asked her how dark it was underground, and she told me to close my eyes. But so I did a lot of gardening with my mom, and my grandma owned a bookstore. So when I was a kid,
perfect combination.
I had a lot of books in my life, and I went to college. I majored in English, and I didn't want to be a teacher, but I didn't know what to do with my English degree. And my senior year of college, I was talking with my mom, and she said, well, why don't you look into publishing? You love books, you love writing, and you majored in English. And so I looked, and there were all these internships available at Organic Gardening magazine. And she said, well, you should apply there. And I got the job. So that's how
that is so terrific. I love how the story of your English interest and gardening go together, and what a beautiful start and inspiration from your mom. My dog is being so persistent right now, so if he says hi, he might just join us this morning.
My dog's
also
here.
I wanted to, what'd you say?
I said my dog's here too. If you hear really loud snoring, it's her.
And you have the kids downstairs because
I do. I'm hiding in my attic.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about the inspiration for this book, which was actually a radish. So tell us about that.
Yeah, Yeah, well, so I was out in my garden one day and my radishes had bolted and I was kind of bummed because I'd wanted to eat the roots and they were flowering and they had the little radish pods, the seed pods. And just kind of on a whim, I popped one into my mouth and I was totally surprised how delicious the radish pods were. And it was really this light bulb moment for me. I kind of like looked around the rest of my garden and was like, wait a minute, what else can I eat in here that I haven't been eating? And, at the time I was perfectly positioned to explore that. I was working for organic gardening and I kind of had the vegetable gardening beat, if you will. Like I wrote most of the vegetable garden articles. And so my job was to like call up someone at Oregon State University and talk to them about vegetable breeding. And that's really how I started to learn that there's so much in our gardens that we as kitchen gardeners get to harvest and eat that you just you never find at a grocery store, and even sometimes not at farmers markets.
Well, and I love that so much, that the variety that you can grow is, sometimes you've never even seen the name of that, plant, that there's so many options. So tell us about your philosophy on gardening, because I think it's so pertinent to where we are right now in our life today in this crazy world we live in.
Yeah, well, I think there's a few things. I think one, kitchen gardening really just lets you develop a closer relationship with your food. So you're getting to choose the exact varieties. As you mentioned, there's so many amazing varieties out there that you're not going to see at a grocery store because they don't ship well. And it's also an opportunity to just go outside and disconnect from all the computers and phones and just, I really think, my friend was saying the other day that she didn't feel very grounded. And I was like, have you thought about planting a garden? Like there really is something about actually putting your hands in the earth that does feel grounding. And I think, that can be missing sometimes in busy modern life. And so I feel like that's something not to overlook the importance of. In terms of my philosophy as a kitchen gardener, I really feel like growing your own food is an opportunity to try vegetables and herbs and, lettuces and all the different things you're growing at different stages of harvest. So what we see at the grocery store and farmers market is, optimized for the profitability of whoever grew it. And so it's not always the only way you can eat something though. So you can eat tiny radish greens. When you're thinning out your radishes, you can pull out the little greens and just toss them into a salad. They have a little bit of a furry texture though, so I think radish greens actually are better cooked. And then you can harvest the roots. You can, the flowers are really pretty. They're usually kind of white with like a little bit of pink, and they look great on a salad. And then you can also eat the pods. When they first form is when they're best. They get a little bit tough as they get older. And there's even, if you find you like radish pods, there's even a few radish pods that in Asia, they actually grow the radish for the pods for some cuisines. So there's even radish varieties. Rat tail radish is one that's the most commonly available, that gets these really long pods, and you are supposed to stir fry the pods. So that's just one example of really being able to try different stages of harvest and eat different parts of the plant than you might be used to eating.
And that's one thing I love about your book, is you have so many different examples, Willi, of things that I've never even thought of, about things that I could eat, that are a part of a plant. So I thank you for that inspiration.
Oh, you're welcome.
So, one of the things that we talked about yesterday as we were prepping for today is that sometimes people get so stressed out about, it's like, oh my gosh, I need to get out in the garden. You have a very busy life. You're an entrepreneur, you're a mom of 2 kids, you have a dog. And, you said, it's like, you don't have to be stressed. This is about coming back to the earth, being grounded, and tell them it's like, you don't have to, like you said in your own garden, that you don't do the garden at home, but you use a community garden. So tell us a little bit about that. Oh
yeah. Well, yesterday Joni was like, oh, maybe you could like show us some pictures of your current garden. And I was like, it's going to be very inspiring right now. It's been really cold in Portland. And so some stuff that like didn't even come up because it's just been like 40 degrees and rainy all spring. And so, yeah, so over the past few years, we remodeled our garage and our backyard, and my backyard just like wasn't a great place to grow food. And we actually, when we bought our house, it was completely paved except for this small patch of grass in asphalt. And so for the past 8 years, we've been depaving our property.
Great.
Which has been awesome, but we didn't feel comfortable planting directly into the ground. So I have a small garden in my backyard. I have 3 horse troughs, which I really like because I think they're a great investment. They're about the same cost as a cedar raised bed, just a single one, but you just have to like boop, put it in place and fill it up with soil. And then they last a long time. So I have those and some whiskey barrels. And then I gave up my plot at the end of last year, but for the past few years, I was also gardening at a community garden. And I've gardened on and off at community gardens for the past 20 years. They're a great, if I have more time or there's more I want to grow or there's something happening in my own yard that's going to make it hard for me to garden, I'll get a plot. And so I love the community aspect. It's always fun to see what other people are growing and how they're growing it. So yeah, but I think what I was telling Joni yesterday is I think sometimes I'll find myself, oh God, I got to get outside and plant those seeds. And then I have to remind myself that my garden should be a source of joy, not stress. Right. I'm doing it for me and because I like it. And sometimes I see people get a little bit, worried that their garden looks weedy or, they didn't get their stuff in the ground. And there's always next year if you have some sort of dream for how perfect your garden should be. If it's not working out this year with a vegetable garden, you can blank slate next year. You can try again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I know. I just planted some stuff last week. I'm like, I've got to get it in the ground. It was the basil. And then somebody said to me, it's like, that's too early. It's going to be 45 degrees this week. And I'm like, all stressed out. I have all these ready to go into the ground this weekend because all ready to roll. And, I have all these seeds and I'm like kind of stressed out, but I'm just going to like be mindful because it's just not time yet. And some of the season is, maybe a little bit later this year. So I want to change direction a little bit and talk about, having a rich experience in the garden all starts with the foundation. And I know you want to share your screen here with some thoughts on, we're going to talk about soil, which is the most important piece of having a good garden is to have good soil. So let me, there you go. Great. So talk to us about the importance of soil and what you do to prep your soil for a kitchen garden.
Yeah, so this is a picture of in my previous house, a soil from one of my beds, and you can see it's dark, it's crumbly. And so what I like to do when I'm first putting a garden in, if it's in the ground, is I like to really sort of deeply make sure the soil is loose. So I dig it down and I put in quite a bit of compost. I usually put about 4 inches of compost on top and then really work that in. And I do that once. And then after that, I try not to disturb my soil again. So the way I help my soil in the fall is I sheet mulch. So I'll put, and I even will do this in my troughs. So I'll mix leaves and grass clippings together pretty deep and set them on top of the soil and cover that with burlap. And over the winter, that starts to decompose. And then I'll just gently mix it in the top few inches of the soil, because if you really till your soil a lot, there's a pretty intricate structure down there with the mycorrhizae fungi and the beneficial bacteria and everything. Soil's a living thing. And so really getting in and tilling it disrupts that ecosystem in your soil. So I try to...
There's a huge movement. There's a huge movement called the no-till movement. And so that's really an important point that Willi just made about that. And as far as the burlap goes, do you leave the burlap or do you take it off?
I take it off, in spring and when it's time to, and it's always amazing, it's pretty much soil under there because the worms have been working at it over the winter. And so that's how I kind of compost stuff from my yard in my beds. And then I might add a little bit more purchased compost on top. And I usually, before I plant, dig in just an organic granulated fertilizer, just a basic. I don't even really have a favorite one.
Okay.
Just like a basic one. I usually try to look for one that has worm castings in it, because worm castings have a lot of beneficial microbes in them. So yeah, and then, the thing that I think is the most important with soil care is waiting until your soil is dry enough to work. A big mistake people do is they get out there and they start weeding and they're digging around. And if the soil is so wet, if you take a clump of soil in your hand and you squeeze it and then you let it go and drop it and it just stays in a clump, it's too wet to work.
Okay.
If you squeeze the soil, you want it to come together. If it's too dry, it'll just, won't come together. You want it to come together and then, break easily apart. Then that's a good sort of dry down state for the soil. So wait until your soil is dry enough to work. And then I like to pay attention, and in the book, you'll see this a lot, to the soil temperature. So you can just get a little soil thermometer at the hardware store. It'll tell you what the temperature is. And you can start to see when certain plants do better or germinate best, above certain temperatures. And the warmer your soil, the faster things are going to germinate. So peas will germinate really fast in, 60-degree soil, but they'll 65 degrees.
Ours is probably still like 40 here.
Yeah, but they will germinate, at lower temperatures. And so I like to kind of wait and look and see.
I think that's really smart.
And then I like to weed and then kind of rake my soil down. And then I usually wait like a week or two. And then if anything else pops up, I go back through and weed. And I thought the next.
Oh, so I had one question here though. You have some starts here or seeds. Yeah. What do you, as far as seeds versus starts, what's your preference?
Oh, sure. So seeds are cheaper. So I use them as much as I can, but for instance, I never start my own tomatoes or eggplants or peppers anymore because I have a small garden and I like to really grow of different varieties. And so it doesn't make sense for me to start my own tomatoes because then I get, 12 of the same tomato type. So I usually buy starts of the big summer veggies. I think cucurbits do best. So cucumbers and squash, I think they do best from seed. If you buy a start of those, they get their true leaves. They're those big spoon like leaves. And then you want the true leaves barely poking up. They just don't, if they're already starting to vine, they're usually too big and they don't transplant super well. So I almost always plant those guys by seed. And then carrots do best, beets do best by seed.
And Willi has a nice, really, really nice on sowing recommendations and plants or crops to plant by seedlings, crops to grow either from seeds or starts, and then self-sowing. So it's just a really good reminder list of what works best. So let's go to the next image.
Oh yeah, I have to do that. So this was my beautiful garden that we sold this house. And then sadly the person who bought it bulldozed my garden and built townhouses here. So this garden's not even there anymore. But I just wanted to show this because it really has a mix of in-ground and the troughs that I like to use. And I just wanted to show this because you can really garden like your mom anywhere, any place. You can, I think sometimes people are like, oh, I have to use a raised bed. And a raised bed is nice because it gives you, 6 or 8 inches of really loose soil and it kind of contains everything, but that's not in your budget or it's not going to work in your yard. You can definitely just grow stuff in the ground. Like that's totally okay. I usually just like to, kind of make a mound. When those beds don't have food growing in them, they kind of look like graves, freshly dug graves, because there's like a little bit of the soil's mounded over the path. So I just wanted, and then over in the corner, you can see I've got a little hoop house that I built that had warmer season crops in it and just a simple trellis that had beans. And then there's this sort of tornado of peas growing. And you could see some cloches in there that had, I think, peppers underneath them growing. So this was taken probably in late May. So there was a lot going on there.
How did you get the tornado of peas? I just have to ask. I've never
grow
seen
like
that.
that. I mean, they just kind of do that sometimes. I probably had it planted. A lot of times I'll take old tomato cages, you know, the wire ones, and I actually like to use those upside down. They're kind of worthless for tomatoes, but they
Yeah,
make
they are.
good climbing structures for cucumbers and peas. If you zip tie their tines together and then use landscaping pins to hold the round part down onto the soil, they make a good little trellis.
I'm going to use that. So we have a question in the chat. Do you use peat pods to start your crops? And we should talk about peat as well.
I don't use peat because
Yeah.
peat is not really a renewable resource. And
Yeah.
so I think coconut coir is a better option if you're wanting to use a pot. And actually, a lot of times what I'll do is you get a soil block maker. So you just, it's this little machine, and you pack some potting soil in there, and then it makes little blocks that you can plant directly into. Because with the coconut coir or peat, or the paper with pots, they'll say they're biodegradable, but they don't biodegrade fast enough. So you do need to peel those pots off before you plant stuff in the ground. Otherwise, you'll get this little root bound plant because the roots can't get out of the paper or the peat. So I usually just use that, or sometimes a lot of times I'll start lettuce by seed in my garden, and then I'll also start some just in tray packs outside. You can get little plastic trays, or I even have some wood ones. And though I think sometimes they do better in the plastic, unfortunately. But I'll start some lettuces there, and then I'll kind of start my own starts basically, and then I can just move them around. And I'll do that at the same time that I direct seed into my bed.
Yeah. And okay. And just a reminder, like Willi said, most people say now not to use peat. I just want to say that one more time. Okay, let's go to the next one. I love that garden there, by the way. I'm so sorry it's not there anymore.
Me too. Well, I just wanted to show, I'm a huge fan of trying to make your vegetable garden as beautiful as possible. I think, sometimes people have this idea that there's your like pretty part of your garden is your ornamental garden, and then you have your vegetable garden, and that's kind of where the business gets done. And I think that they can really mix, and you'll have a healthier garden if you do intermix flowers with your vegetables, if you let some of your vegetables flower. So kale is going to start flowering for many of us soon. And if you look at those kale blossoms on a warm day, you will see so many beneficial insects flocking to them. It's just, they're a huge draw. So I planted, there's some lobelia and bidens and nasturtium here. And I had someone once tell me, she's like, you can't plant nasturtiums. They lure aphids to your garden. And I think that, aphids are in the garden. And if you, what I find is I plant nasturtiums, and they go to my nasturtiums and they stay off my kale. And when the nasturtiums just start to collapse because they get so many aphids, I just pull out my nasturtiums that I care less about and put them in the compost. And then, I've sort of helped save my kale. And so I think that's just something.
It's complementary planting that's been used for, generations to keep, to have pest management. So I was in Cuba many years ago, and we went to a sustainable garden there. They use it's all organic, and the whole garden, it was huge. It was an urban garden, and it was all compatible planting, and that's how they managed pests. So it's been done for forever. So
absolutely.
So you have lobelia there and nasturtiums, and then what's the yellow plant there?
I think those are bidens. It could, I'm pretty sure they sort of look like marigolds, but they're different.
They're very cute. Okay, let's see what else you got.
Oh, wait, sorry. So these are the two tools that are like what I use the most. So the red one is a stirrup hoe. This is you can get it from Territorial Seed Company. They sell them, or any good hardware store. You'll see that it has a replaceable blade. So there's there's these, you can take the blade off and replace it. But basically it moves back and forth and it slides just under the soil and cuts the roots off baby weeds. So you can't use it if you have a really, like, sadly, part of my afternoon is going to go out. I have a bunch of grass growing someplace that I need to dig out. But if you get your bed, you know, how looking a few slides ago where it's just really nice, and then you have a flush of weeds come up, you can just boop, like pull that stirrup hoe through, and it totally just gets them. And then I use the little circle hoe in smaller spaces. It's a handheld one.
Nice. What do you think about the hori hori?
Oh, I love a good hori hori knife. So hori hori knife it's a Japanese knife, and it's sort of more blunt on one side and then serrated on the other. And it's great. You can use it to dig. It's really great for digging out like blackberries or you know, sort of stickery weeds, because they get in there, and you can also kind of chop off the root.
I use mine all the time, so I would personally add that to this list.
We could definitely add that to. It's less of a weeding tool, but I could definitely add it in here as a top tool.
Okay, and then let's go to the next one.
So
we're going to be talking about herbs now. I know somebody said in the chat they want more herbs in their life. I want more herbs in my life as well. And so you have what, sage and thyme there. I have a little thyme right here.
So I love Berggarten sage. So these are two herbs. I'm totally, whoever said they want to grow more herbs, I stand behind you, because I think herbs are really the best, easiest thing to grow, and they add so much flavor. Like, you could get a frozen pizza and cook it, and then, you know, sprinkle basil from your garden all over it, and you just made your frozen pizza like way better.
That's a great little tip.
Yeah, or you know, you get Thai takeout, put some Thai basil on it. So I love herbs. They're easy to use, they're easy to grow. You can put them in containers. These are growing, they have some frost on them in this picture, but they're growing in an ornamental bed. And they're beautiful plants. The Berggarten sage is my favorite sage. It has a great flavor, and it's also just a beautiful, it forms this mound of silvery leaves, and it doesn't flower too much. So it does get a few purple flowers on it, but and then I love English thyme, lemon thyme, French thyme. They're all great, and they make kind of little, you know, shrubby things. Berggarten sage, at least in my climate, you know, it lasts several years. Eventually something will happen. The plant gets kind of woody, and, you know, someone steps on it, and
they're evergreen all year. So it's a nice little pop in the garden as well.
In the late winter, they look a little straggly. And then I just noticed mine yesterday are they're fleshing out with new leaves. So I love sage and thyme and rosemary. And those are the only thing to think about herbs is like, there's kind of like herbs that like drier feet. Yes. So rosemary, sage, thyme, they're more Mediterranean. They prefer drier soil. And then, and they're the ones that have kind of thicker leaves. And then, you know, parsley, chives, chervil, basil, anything with a softer leaf that they like a little bit more. Yes.
We've got parsley here. Oh, so here, I want to talk about lemongrass for a second. So I always get one lemongrass because someone told me that it keeps mosquitoes away.
Oh, I did not know that.
That was a tip that somebody told me. So I always have one, and I love it.
Very good.
Okay, so go ahead.
And then I know we have quite a few people from California, so I wanted to show this because I took this picture in California. It is coleus and two types of basil, and there's some Dusty Miller in there, and and there's canna. So it's this very tropical looking garden, but a huge part of it is an edible plant. And so I definitely recommend adding herbs in other plants too. You know, peas can look really pretty on a trellis in your flower beds. But this was so inspiring.
I love this so much. That coleus is so beautiful. And one thing about coleus is there's so many different color combos that you can get. So you could do that with basil or a variety of different elements. And I love how they have the grasses over on the left-hand side. Yeah. So I think this is a great question. Joan's asking about tips for growing indoors. She has a patio that's shaded. Interestingly enough, we just looked up for a friend of mine who has a shaded patio, herbs that would grow in the shade, and there are a couple. So
mint grows okay in shade. And and if you don't have a ton of sun, what I always say is just try it. Like, try some basil. The woodier herbs might not do quite as well, just they grow slower and they are from climates that have lots of really intense UV light. So but yeah, just give it a try. Mint for sure does really good. You can little lettuces and things, and then there are all these little kits that have a grow light on them that you can grow basil, and those actually work pretty well. I've when I worked at the gardening magazine, people sent me stuff all the time, and I had a few of those, and they always worked pretty well. So if you don't have an outdoor space, that can be a good thing to try, especially for if you want to have basil, like fresh basil right away.
Yeah. And Joan, I would look up, just Google shade herb plants, because he got about 4 or 5 for his 2 containers on his deck that's shady. So I would recommend that as well. Okay, so let's now talk about greens.
Yes. Okay. Well, I just wanted to share, this is one of my very favorite greens to grow. It's Erbette Swiss chard. And it has a really tender leaf. So sometimes Swiss chard, it has like such a thick leaf, and this has almost a spinach type texture to the leaf. It's not as pretty as rainbow chard, it's just green. But it is a really delicious chard. It grows well from seed. It produces all season. You can plant it now and we'll be harvesting it well into the fall, or depending on your climate, it will even overwinter. So it's a really delicious green. Greens are one of those things that you can grow from seeds or starts. Like I planted more starts this year than I normally do because I'm a little behind. So I bought some lettuce starts, but I also planted arugula and spinach from seed the same day I planted my lettuce starts, because they grow fast from seed. I love Erbette. And then I am a huge arugula fan. So you mentioned self-sowing earlier. Self-sowing means, the plant goes to seed and then plants itself. And really, you can plant arugula once and then never need to plant it again. My mom actually doesn't like arugula. And in high school, I planted arugula in her garden and it still comes up. And she's like, I found some more arugula. Like, she can't get rid of it. But it's not like a pernicious weed or anything. It's just it's self-sows with abandon, let's say.
So somebody just mentioned to me a perennial arugula, but maybe that's what she meant, because I was like, a perennial arugula, it was an Italian arugula she mentioned. So
I don't know, maybe there is. I don't know of a perennial arugula. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Yeah. This is Sylvetta, which is the closest to the wild arugula that they'll have in Italy. Has that really deeply lobed leaf. And then if you like more sort of baby green arugula, I like this one called Astro, and I think I shared a list of varieties that you can post in the chat later, but it has a more spinach type leaf. So there's different types of arugula that have more stemmy lobed leaves versus kind of a more spinach type leaf.
Wonderful. And we're going to put that list, we'll send that out in an email with the link for the video that will be out on Monday. So what about cat or pet friendly indoor gardening? Suzanne, that's quite the list. As far as, we talked about that in indoor in houseplants last week, that a majority of those were poisonous to animals. But what about herbs?
As far as I know, most herbs are fine for cats. And I always think, cats do like cat grass, and they do like cat mint a lot. And so I think, if you're concerned about that, planting stuff, that might attract your cats is good. But yeah, I think I don't have a cat right now. My husband is allergic, but my dogs like to eat my raspberries and my cucumbers.
And strawberries.
They seem fine.
So tell us about this pea you have up here.
So this is a pea I think really everyone should grow. It's called Golden India. And it's a snow pea. So it has these beautiful yellow, sort of light yellow pods, and then two-toned purple flowers. So it looks a lot like a sweet pea, but then you can eat it too. And I love peas. Speaking of growing stuff for, different parts of the plant, pea shoots are so delicious, and they are, my book came out a while ago, and that now you can get pea shoots at the grocery store, but that they were not a popular green. And I always plant my peas too close together because I like to pinch out the peas, and then you can pinch your peas back too when they're first sprouted, and they'll grow more bushy. You'll get more pods later. So harvesting, a salad of pea greens early on in your pea season is a way to get more pods later.
I love that idea. Okay, what's next?
And then I wanted to, so I love, I don't have a picture, but I love Sugar Ann, which is a snap pea. That's my son's favorite. And so it's a really juicy, crisp pod with sweet peas on the inside. And then Wando is a shelling pea. So shelling peas, I mean, technically you could eat the pod. It's not going to kill you, but they're just like really tough and fibrous. So you're just eating the peas on the inside. And I wanted to share this because a recipe we're going to talk about at the end uses shelling peas and garlic scapes. And Wando is one of my favorite shelling peas.
Great. I'm going to go to a nursery today and pick up a lot of these. Someone said the perennial cilantro is an Asian variety and it sends runners everywhere. I think I might have that one. That's super interesting.
Cilantro. Yeah. It tastes a little bit different.
Oh, cilantro versus arugula. That's right. Maybe that's.
There's a perennial.
Mine's arugula for sure, but okay, so I know we're going to talk about squash next, which is one of my favorite subjects because I grew this for the first time last year and it was the most magical experience ever. So let's talk about Trombetta squash.
So Trombetta squash is an heirloom summer squash variety from Italy. And I share a love of it with Joni. It is a great summer squash. So, most summer squash, the patty pan squash, zucchini, crooknecks, all of those, you really, for best flavor and to not drive yourself crazy where you're like, oh my gosh, I have so much squash, I'm never going to be able to eat this. You got to harvest it when it's really little, like no bigger than the size of your hand. Otherwise they can get seedy, they can get tough, and they grow so fast. Like you forget it one day and then like 2 days later, it's the size of your arm. So I like Trombetta because it has this really long neck with a bulb at the end.
They can be 3 feet long. It's amazing.
Yeah. And the seeds are all in the bulb. So if you get a really big squash, it doesn't matter because the neck of the squash still stays tender, even though the squash itself is, getting older. So it's nice because you can, if they get big, it's not a big deal. You're not like wasting the squash. And then they make tons of blossoms. So if you like to stuff squash blossoms or you like to put we have a pizza oven, one of those little unis. So we like to do squash blossom pizzas. You get tons of squash blossoms. And then it's a climbing squash. So this is just a piece of concrete reinforcing wire. You can buy it at Home Depot in panels. And it's just tied to some bamboo. It's super easy, simple way to make a trellis. And
you need a big trellis for this Trombetta squash. I mean, mine, it was like the Jolly Green Giant. It just kept growing and growing. I mean, it was in the perfect place. It was magic. So
it'll grow 8 feet. Yeah, it's cute. And it'll just wind its way up through that. And so I just wanted to show this. Sorry if you hear children yelling in the
That's okay. That's totally fine.
And then this is also a Nero de a Toscana kale, so a dino kale. And I just wanted to show that because it's also like 4 feet.
It looks so happy. I don't know that I've ever seen one that big. So So have you had a good experience growing cabbage?
I have had good experience growing cabbage. I like to grow cabbage from starts. And my favorite types of cabbage to grow are the Savoy cabbages. So they have the really deeply crinkled leaves, and
Mhm.
they're just they're beautiful. And I like cabbage because they get really big. So the only thing is it can be a little hard to grow cabbage in small spaces because the plant is going to end up being like 2 feet around.
2 feet?
Yeah, like they
Okay.
get, you know,
They get huge, so
the
it takes a
plant
lot of
gets, you know, the
space.
head will be
Yeah.
down in there, but there's like a lot of leaves that are
Okay.
growing
So
out there.
maybe not in my raised beds on my neighbor's
They're
property
beautiful
for
plants. Like, you know,
cabbage.
try sticking one into a veggie garden, into like a flower bed or something.
Oh, okay. That's a great
Yeah,
idea.
or just know that it's going to take up, you know,
A
put it
lot
in
of
the corner
space.
of a bed, and you can plant stuff around it, but as it matures, it's going to eat up a lot of space.
Terrific. Okay, what's next on your little slides there?
We're getting to
Okay, let's go
Right.
back because I want to touch on a couple of other things.
Sure.
So roots, tubers, and bulbs. Like what do you suggest that we plant for roots that are fun, or do you have some thoughts on different varieties that we should grow?
Yeah, so I love to grow the different colors of carrots. And you can also, there's a lot of different carrot shapes. So there's really you know, long, skinny, pointy carrots. There's the French carrots that are more tubular with a blunt tip. There's round carrots that are just completely like a ball. And so I think it's pretty fun to experiment with the different types of carrots, and carrots have such pretty foliage. I like to plant them as a border around beds. So you can plant, you know, carrots all around a raised bed, the entire outside, and then they get that frilly, ferny foliage. And then you can put other plants on the inside, like bush beans, or and bush beans can actually be nice because carrots have a pretty long growing season, and they actually hold pretty well once they mature in the soil. And then you could
Mhm.
plant bush beans. You could have lettuces in there now. So, you know, carrots around the border, lettuces or other greens in the middle. When those are done, pull those out, put some bush beans in. When those are done, you could plant some broccoli starts in like late July,
Oh,
early
fun.
August. And
Yeah.
then those will, you know, can overwinter depending on your climate. You know, in the Northwest, they'll just overwinter. I saw someone from Minnesota. I think they probably won't overwinter in Minnesota unless
Probably
you
not.
put a winter gardening like hoop house situation over it.
Yeah, and then so what do you plant? I mean, do you do a lot of fall planting? I mean, that's not really pertinent now, but what do you plant in the fall for, you know, throughout the like into the winter season for this climate?
Yeah. So in the Northwest, a lot of times, so the thing about fall gardening is, you know, you have to plant it in summer. And I think that's sometimes where it can get tricky for people with a small garden, is that if you want to be putting in, you know, purple sprouting broccoli or other, you know, some carrot crop or something that's going to go in the fall, you have to plant it in late July or early August so that it has enough time to grow. Because once the days start getting shorter at the end of September, October, the plant's growth really slows down. And so, but if your garden is full of summer crops, it's still like making you tons of tomatoes and peppers and stuff. It's kind of, you know, it can be a question of like where to squeeze those fall crops in. That is why I love bush beans, because bush beans are a determinate plant, which means they put all of their fruit out at once. They were developed for canning. And so they push all their beans out, and then you pull the plants. And because they're a legume, they've been depositing nitrogen into the soil. So they've been, you know, adding nitrogen in. And then you can put something in for the fall where you put your bush beans in.
That's great. And then we had a question. What are some plants that should not be grown together? Do you have any recommendations on that?
You know, I don't think there's a lot of plants that shouldn't be grown together. I think the idea more is with crop rotation is that you want to try and keep plants that are in the same family together so that you can put them into a different bed. Because for instance, like legumes put a bunch of nitrogen into the soil, and then plants in the nightshade family, potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant use a lot of nitrogen. So if you can plant, those plants after legumes, they can be complementary. Crop rotation is frankly pretty hard if you have a small urban garden. If you have a big plot, then you can be much more strategic about it. But if you have, like me, you have 3 beds and you want to grow a bunch of different stuff, it can be a bit of a challenge to rotate your crops, frankly.
Okay, quick question here. So Marianne lives in San Francisco and it gets hot. Do you have a recommendation on keeping plant or lettuces and herbs from bolting?
Well,
you just snip
a couple things about bolting. So heat makes plants bolt, but so does light. And so San Francisco is still pretty high, not as high as up here in Portland and Seattle, but even though we have, well, typically climate change is different, like more mild summers, I would say. Cilantro bolts up here because the days are so long. So I think for plants that bolt, you just have to plant lots of successive crops so that because you're just knowing that you're going to have a shorter window of harvest. And then I like for lettuces, I like to plant them underneath tomatoes because tomatoes make this kind of, they're big plants. They need a lot of water, so you're watering them frequently, and they make a little microclimate kind of underneath the tomato plants. So a lot of times I'll ring my tomatoes with lettuces. I noticed that they bolt a little bit slower than ones that are out in more full sun. And then if you really want, you can make a little hoop house and put shade cloth over it. And that actually helps quite a bit.
So I'm going to switch gears a little bit here. One of the things I love about your book, Willi, are all the recipes that go along with all of the tips in here. And so for instance, I have some Swiss chard that's been that wintered over, and I see that you have this beautiful spinach risotto recipe, and we want to share one that's pertinent right now. And I think this is really fun. So let's go to the recipe for pesto.
Yeah, so this is, can you guys see? I'm sharing my screen. There we go.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. So this is a recipe for garlic scape pesto and fresh English peas. So I think English peas, I grow them every year, and I don't have a ton of space, so I basically get kind of like one big harvest of them, like one meal, but they are so good. Like a freshly harvested English pea, it tastes like candy. And and they're kind of labor intensive because you have all these pods and you have to scrape the peas out. And so they're a special meal. And I like to make this this pasta. I love bucatini. It's actually been, I read a whole article about it. It's been hard. There's a bucatini shortage since the pandemic. You could definitely just use linguine or spaghetti, any noodle. But if you can find bucatini, tell me where you got it, because I miss it. So what you do is you make a pesto out of garlic scapes. So hardneck garlic gets this, they sort of remind me of like pterodactyls or something, this long, beautiful, curling flower. And you can cut those out before the scape opens and make a pesto out of it. And so you take 8 of the garlic scapes, some Parmesan, walnuts, lemon juice, olive oil, and you blitz that in a food processor. And then you shell your peas and put them in a colander. And when the pasta is ready, you pour the hot pasta water and the pasta over the peas, and then just kind of leave the pasta on top of the peas like a cap for just a minute, and then toss that with the pesto and some more cheese and a lot of freshly ground pepper.
Oh my gosh.
Delicious.
Is anybody else as hungry as I am right now? And
I know, I'm like, maybe I should make this for dinner. Yeah, and the just the hot water and the heat from the pasta will cook the peas, so they don't get that sort of like pruny, wrinkled look like you've been in the bath too long. That's an overcooked pea. So just the heat from the water and the pasta will cook the peas perfectly.
Oh, that sounds so yummy. Oh my gosh. So we had another question in the chat about going back, about nitrogen fixing plants. What exactly do they fix?
Oh, well, so they fix nitrogen. They are little nitrogen factories. They take nitrogen out of the air, and they have a relationship with rhizobia bacteria that live in the soil, and they make these little nodules on their roots, and the bacteria help the plants take nitrogen out of the air and then convert it to a type of nitrogen that plants can use in the soil. So a hard thing for plants is that there's tons of nitrogen in the air, but they can't access it. It's not in a form that the plants can take up. But the legumes will take the nitrogen out of the air, and with their friends, the rhizobia bacteria, they convert it into a form that plants can take up with their roots.
Thank you. That was very good. Oh, she wanted to know what time of year. Just one last question there.
So there's lots of there's cover crops. Like clover is one. So you could plant clover and it would fix nitrogen over the winter, and then you turn that under, and you can, and then you're putting nitrogen from the plant as well into the soil. And then peas and beans and are your common garden plants that are legumes.
Yeah, and you could look up cover crops, Google it, and there's a ton of information on how beneficial that is for your soil. So we've started to do that in where we plant our lettuce, because it's a more protected area that faces east. And but we always plant a cover crop now.
Yeah, buckwheat's a good one too.
So Willi, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Your book is so fabulous. I've just really enjoyed leafing through it, and I'm so excited. I'm going to make a couple of recipes tonight from it, and I've just enjoyed it so much, and I've learned so much, which is the key to, when I go out and start planting my containers with all these beautiful herbs that I have and all my seed packets, I'll be thinking of you and our morning together. So thank you so much. It's so good to see you. Thank you.
The highest compliment is telling me that you learned something from it. I really tried hard when I was writing it to pack it full of just little tidbits that would be useful to people who've been gardening for a long time and maybe they didn't know, or for new gardeners as well. So thank you.
Well, you certainly succeeded with that. So thank you, Willi, so much for joining us.